Welcome to M&A Mondays, the UK's first YouTube series dedicated to all things M&A. From interviews with the leading figures in the industry, to coffee chats with analysts, diversity panels, all the way through to workshops, we'll be covering it all. We do hope you enjoyed the video, and please give us a like and a follow on our social media. Thank you very much.
Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of M&A Mondays, the UK's first YouTube series dedicated to all things M&A. My name is Charlotte and I'm a Speaker Relations Executive, and alongside me is Emerald, who's also a Speaker Relations Executive.
Today we're delighted to welcome another speaker, Jan Laubjerg, for our M&A Monday series with industry focus. Jan is currently the Global Head of Natural Resources at HSBC, and responsible for the delivery of investment banking services to oil and gas, metal and mining, power and utilities, and renewables companies globally, with a strong emphasis on the transition agenda. Before joining HSBC, Jan started his career as a consultant and entered the investment banking industry in 1999 and worked as a managing director at Nomura and Goldman Sachs for over a decade. Jan obtained his undergraduate and master degree at University of Cambridge and has an MBA at Insead Business School. We are very happy to have you here today. So without further ado, let's get started. How are you, Jan?
Very well, thanks. Good to be here.
All right, so time for the first question. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. It's really exciting to us. But yeah, so initially starting your career in management consulting, what made you decide to attend business school and switch to investment banking?
So some of it was planned, some of it was just good fortune. My move into management consulting after university was planned. That was a view I took that management consulting would be a good way to get a broad view of business and also a good training ground for how to think about business problems, all of which it turned out to be. However, there were certain technical skill sets I felt I was missing, particularly having come from what Americans would call a liberal arts background at university. I felt there were some technical skill sets I was missing, particularly on the finance side. And so an MBA was a natural extension of my management consulting period. But also in some ways I view them as sort of just one long period of learning, because whilst management consulting taught me a lot about how to think about business problems and how to structure my thinking and communication of business problems, business school was also, besides getting me up the curve on technical skill sets, was also a great way to get exposure to a broad range of other professionals roughly at the same point in my career and extract from them a lot of learnings about things that I would otherwise not have time in my career to do. So it was a combination of those factors that got me into business school. Now, banking was a little bit more of a good fortune, if I can call it that, in the sense that I did know I wanted to work over the summer during business school. I had the good fortune of landing a summer associate job with Goldman Sachs, and really intended, in all fairness, to enter the field of investment banking. I had other ideas back in the 90s when the dot-com boom was exploding, but I actually found I really enjoyed it. I found the more strategic perspective that you dealt with within investment banking in terms of servicing your clients appealed to me. And so when I was fortunate enough to get an offer, I thought, yep, this is a no-brainer. I'm going to do this at least for a period of time. And also it was an opportunity to really see how the tech boom, I should say, would evolve and where to place my personal bets in terms of career prospects thereafter. As it turned out, I liked investment banking so much, I stayed in it.
Thank you very much for the in-detailed answer. And this follows really nicely to our next question. Many students are conflicted about what type of corporate role they want. So could you please give us an overview and contrast of your consulting role and your investment banking role? Thank you.
Yeah, I could give a sort of very detailed, complex, nuanced, whatnot answer, or I could sort of try to just simplify it and distill it. I prefer the latter for clarity. If you really step back and think about, and these are generalizations, I accept that. If you think about what investment banking does vis-a-vis the corporate world and what management consulting does, I would describe it like this. In essence, investment banking, and by that I mean M&A, capital markets activities in particular, be it equity capital markets or debt capital markets, in essence is either changing the ownership of a balance sheet or changing the capitalization of a balance sheet. That's in essence what it is. Whereas I would describe consulting in essence as an optimization of existing balance sheets, right? Now, I'm sure I'll take a lot of flack for having grossly oversimplified two major industries, but for me, there's more excitement in moving a balance sheet from one owner's hands into another owner's hands, or putting capital into that balance sheet or taking capital out of that balance sheet than necessarily focusing primarily on the optimization on components of that balance sheet. And so for me, that far more profound impact that you have on the overall balance sheet in investment banking, in my judgment, is why I felt that was the more interesting long-term career.
Thank you so much for that. And our next question is a bit more about like your role in your division in the investment bank. And so obviously you've been working in the natural resources division and starting with oil and gas at Goldman Sachs. And how did you initially decide on joining this stream of business?
Yes, so back to my point about some things in your career happen through a very conscious planning and some things just kind of a good fortune. So at the time at Goldman, whilst the activity levels in what's called TMTs, so in particular around the technology end of it, were booming, we were starting to see a pickup in activity in the oil and gas sector. You may or may not recall that oil hit a low of $10 back in 1998, but then pretty much went on a straight upward trajectory for the next nearly 10 years. And so with that buoyancy in the sector, we saw increased activity levels, but across the street, teams were typically understaffed. And I was a young investment banker who wanted to get significant deal activity under my belt as a way to develop my own skill set. And I could just see that there was going to be a high degree of activity within the oil and gas space. And so I started working quite a bit with the oil and gas team, and eventually they said, look, why don't you come join us, because we've got a ton to do. And that's the start of where the story as to where I am now.
Thank you very much. And now, as the global head of natural resources at HSBC, what are your main responsibilities and what is your day-to-day work like?
So first and foremost, across the different sectors that you referenced earlier that we define as falling within natural resources, first and foremost, it's to set the overall strategy of what we're trying to do with those business activity or that client base. Secondly, it is to align the appropriate resources against that opportunity set. Thirdly, it is to think carefully about what are the kind of services we want to provide to those clients, both capital and advisory services. And then fourthly, it is to nurture and develop our talent within those different teams that cover those sectors. I would also say there's another component that perhaps hasn't existed as much sort of that wouldn't have existed as much 5 years ago. And that's to do with the fact that you describe the sectors in their traditional description, i.e. the oil and gas sector, the metals and mining sector, the power utilities, renewable sector. And historically, most professional services organizations would have organized their teams very distinctly within those sectors. Our thesis is that there is a growing convergence of the issues and ideas that our clients care about within each of those verticals. There's a convergence across those verticals. So in other words, an oil and gas company is very focused on what balance sheets to acquire in the renewable space. Renewables companies may be very focused on what is the metal supply chain that will drive the battery market going forward. And so what we're finding is, and this is a big part of my responsibility as well, is whilst we still have deep expertise within each one of those areas, we also have to synergize across those traditional verticals in terms of idea generation, in terms of making ourselves relevant to our clients. So our oil and gas clients want to see our renewables bankers. That would not necessarily have been true even 5 years ago.
Thank you so much for that. It's quite interesting to hear kind of about how like it changed and these different roles. But so moving on to the next question, how do you plan on contributing to ESG and responsible investment through selecting clients and collaborations?
Yeah, so that's a very topical question, a very topical issue for us at HSBC, but I would frankly say across the whole financial sector. It is an interesting dynamic and trend, I would say, because first of all, I'd say of all the sort of factors that have affected the energy sphere in as long as I can remember, this is the first, and that ranges from politics in the Middle East to technology evolution, et cetera, et cetera. This is the first dynamic, and by this I mean the transition agenda and the increased focus on ESG. It's the first dynamic that I'd say has really been driven by your generation. We have found that in the past 5 to 10 years, it's the younger generation that have effectively pushed for change, which in effect has then come through primarily shareholders into the energy sector and into the financial community. And so for us, we are now absolutely laser focused on how do we implement, but also see as an opportunity ESG. And we do that collaboratively with our clients. We work on a number of potential solutions around ESG, whether it be sustainability bonds or other form of green financing. And it's a huge business opportunity for us. But also, as I said earlier, we work with our clients collaboratively to help them move their balance sheets, perhaps from carbon intensive activities towards being exposed to lots of renewables activities, for example. So, it's no secret that many of the oil and gas clients are now deploying significant capital, both through M&A and also organically, into far more environmentally sustainable energy activities. And that's a huge advisory activity for us. So we see it as a huge opportunity. We see it as core. I mean, that's, as I say, the transition agenda. That's effectively what we're referring to when we say that. We see it as core to our business. Frankly, I would go as far as to say, not only has much of this change really originated from your generation, maybe the generation that came just before you, but also I would say that for folks like yourselves, as you guys come out of universities and join the professional services world, to the extent you choose to focus around natural resources, I would argue you have the most interesting time to do so in probably the last 50 years plus, for the simple reason that the transition agenda is going to change so fundamentally our sectors, ours being the ones that I'm responsible for, in a way that has not come close to it in the last 50 years. And fundamentally, professional services, whether you're an investment banker or a management consultant, you need to have change in your client base. The more change that your clients are facing, the more it offers opportunity for you to support your clients through advice, through capital provision. So it's a fantastic time to be graduating and coming into the natural resources sector, probably better than it's ever been.
Thank you very much. And yes, I'm sure our audiences will be extra interested in it after what you just said. So the next question is, what do you think of the natural resources industry in the next decade? Now that we're shifting away from traditional resources, entering a new era of clean energy, do you think that would change your work?
So I'd like to think that what I described in the past sort of 15 minutes as how we have set ourselves up to service our clients is in anticipation of that change. And we're already seeing that change, right? So there's going to be a massive influx of capital, just staggering amounts of capital are going to go into building a low carbon economy. Most of that, or a big chunk of it, is going to be within the natural resources sector. And so that inflow of capital is a huge fee opportunity for the financial community. And we would like to think at HSBC, we're at the forefront of that. You flood capital into a sector, it's also going to create M&A opportunities. Some people are going to say it's faster to buy something than to build it. And that's going to create a huge dynamic for M&A. So phenomenal activity levels within the low carbon area. At the same time, it also creates a pressure for many of our clients. And again, that's an opportunity for us to be of assistance and support to our clients, which is, what do you do? I mean, just step back for a second. The investment, the capital that's being put into the hydrocarbon sector, let's just take one form, oil, not even oil and gas, just oil. $500 billion has historically been invested in capital expenditure into that sector for the last, let's just say, 20 years. So the capital base that's invested in what some might say is an old industry, but it's still a huge part of our economy. What are you going to do about it, right? You I don't know if you have pension funds yet, but you're on day one, when you get your first salary, part of that will go into a pension fund, of which that pension fund most likely will have some exposure to that capital expenditure I spoke about. And so to preserve our collective futures, we have to be judicious custodians of that capital. And that's an issue that our clients are wrestling with. What do they do with their legacy businesses, if I can call it that, at the same time as they're trying to grow these low carbon businesses? So to answer the heart of your question, one other thing I'd also say, which is, when you look at economies or industries, you generally find that the rate of technology evolution, the leap change, generally tends to be greater earlier in the industry's life cycle. So whilst I would always acknowledge that the technology levels in oil and gas today are phenomenal, some of the things that people can do in that sector, game-changing technology is less likely to occur day by day. Whereas in the world of transition, because those are newer industries, we're more likely to see really material steps from a technology point of view. So the other dynamic that I think has changed in servicing the energy sector in the broadest sense, the natural resources sector, is the increased role of technology to just have an amazing impact on step changes in how the industry looks. So those are some of the dynamics that I think are different if you are servicing the natural resources sector now, coming out of university, versus when I came out of university back in the 90s.
Thank you so much for such an insightful and detailed response. I find it really interesting. And we're actually on to our last question already. And it's more about like your leadership role. So given your leadership role at the companies you work for, what qualities do you look for aside from technical ability when promoting analysts, associates, and VPs?
Yeah, so it's a question that people wrestle with throughout their careers as they take on increasing managerial responsibility. I'm going to give again an oversimplified answer. I think first and foremost, the thing you cannot replace is absolute raw horsepower, as my first boss called it, intellectual raw horsepower. So the capacity to think, and to think ideally in a multidimensional manner. That's probably the first criteria. Then, as there's been lots of social psychology books written on in recent years, the concept of grit, or in other words, perseverance, hard work. You can be the best athlete ever, but you still got to go train, right? You still got to work hard at it. And so those two combinations are, to me, fundamental. Then where you really make the difference between the absolute greats and the greats is around things like passion, right? You have to have a high degree of passion and it shows, to not only do your core job well, but also to lead others. Others will energize themselves off of your passion. And you very quickly can see folks who have lost their passion and their performance suffers, no matter how smart they are, how much effort they put in. If I had to distill it, those are the three most important factors, speaking on a generalized basis.
All right, thank you so much for that. And those were all the questions from us. And so thank you again for joining us today. And we really appreciate it. I honestly thought it was incredibly insightful and interesting to hear all of your, obviously hearing about your experiences, but also your insights. And for those of you watching, we hope that you enjoyed this week's episode of M&A Mondays. And please make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. See you next time.
Thanks.